text, sacrificing the form. The author favors the second one, considering more effective. And Mona Baker, which is my favorite one, argues that equivalence is a relative notion, and this is influenced by a variety of cultural and linguistic factors. The mentioned theories imply that translation and equivalence do exist, because it does. We read translations every day, as we can read translated text every day. But it's not exactly the same as the source text. Techniques are understood in an instrument. Techniques. I just jump off very quickly. Techniques are understood as an instrument of textual analysis that, in combination with other instruments, allows us to understand how translation equivalence works in relation to the original text. Both the artist and the translator, because I compare the translator as an artist, can decide what type of techniques they are going to use for their art. A technique is the result of a choice made by the translator. Its validity will depend on various questions related to the contents, the purpose of the translator, audience expectations, etc. And some of these techniques are borrowing. The source language form is taken from the target language, usually because the last one has a gap on the lexicon. And the famous example of Sputnik, when the Russians launched their satellites and the Western press didn't have a word for satellites, so they borrowed the word Sputnik. Adaptation, it occurs when something specific to one language culture is expressed in a completely different way in the other language culture. This is used mostly on movie titles. For example, the title of the movie Jaws was translated into tiburón in Spanish. Cut is a literal translation at the level of phrases. For example, skyscraper, that is literally translated into rascacielos. Transposition, how translator deals with grammatical changes in the translator, and it operates at a grammatical level. Modulation, using a phrase that is different in the source and target language to convey the same idea. And equivalence, the translation of idioms when two languages refer to the same situation but in different ways. The famous example of It's Raining Cats and Dogs, and in Spanish version, Está lloviendo a cántaros. Literary translations. There is a significant difference between a literary language and various forms of written language. A text is read as literature if we dwell on the beauties of its language, its form, and its themes, and don't take it as primarily factual in intent. Jean Meyer, the author of the journal What is Literature, uses critical approach and prototype approach to define culture. The critical approach uses a checklist outlook, which conveys a set of characteristics that describes a word, and if all of them are checked, the word applies. For example, a bird may be defined as one if it has feathers, wings, and lays eggs. For literature, he uses examples in a written form, uses artistic features for the formation of sentences, and an open to interpretation of the reader. But on the other side, we have the prototypical approach. It's characterized by a clear, inflexible boundaries. Searches the correct use of words by using a prototype, or I can say that it's like the best example of a word, to which other examples of the word bear some resemblance. For example, for literature, this author says that a written text marked by a careful use of language are in a literary genre, read aesthetically, and contain a weak implicative. So, if we're based on the first characteristic, which is a written form, we can include advertisements, shopping lists, or cereal boxes. But, however, they do not fulfill the second characteristic, which is a careful use of language. This characteristic can remove encyclopedias, but not personal essays or works of research. Nevertheless, the last one does not fulfill the last characteristic, which is the literary genre: poetry, prose, fiction, and drama. Meyer does not restrict the literature to these genres alone, rather suggests their best example based on the prototypical approach. So if we base on the prototypical approach, La Sombra del Viento, Carlos Ruiz Zafón is a written text marked by a careful use of language, are in a literary genre, read aesthetically, and can contain implicative. So based on all of these characteristics, we can say, based on the prototypical approach, that La Sombra del Viento, Carlos Ruiz Zafón is a literary work. Methods. So the type of this study was a qualitative study, since the data was collected from the analysis of the process of translation from the source text to the target text. The level of the study was a descriptive one by using qualitative methods to gather in-depth information, which included identifying the techniques the translator of the book used to transfer cultural boundaries. And the tool of this project was an Excel table in which contained for one column the target text and another column the source text. Sorry, but first was the source text and then the target text. Setting and participants. The setting of this research was La Sombra del Viento, Carlos Ruiz Zafón, a complex novel originally written in Spanish. I can say it's a complex novel because it doesn't fit in one genre alone. It has like a little bit of romance, a little bit of adventure, horror, mystery, historical, and it's like a sum up of a lot of genres together. That's why I say it's a complex novel. The story develops in Spain, where Carlos Ruiz Zafón was born in 1945 in Barcelona, aftermath the Civil Spanish War and the World War II. Most of the book narrative is told by Daniel Sempere, which is a 15-year-old boy. And then data analysis was collected from the source text. It was categorized into patterns. The data analysis of this project followed a qualitative analysis approach, which includes coding and developing category systems. That's why we develop in the source text targeted method. This type of data analysis is applied when the collected data is transcribed and read line by line, meaning the data was divided into defined units. And the results. So you can see this beautiful piece of cake. And you can see that adaptation was the technique that was mostly used with 70.6%. Then we have equivalence with 11%. Then follows literal translation with 10.1%. Then we have omission with 4.6% and borrowing with 3.7%. Some of these examples, for example, of adaptation is: sal ya que ese fantoche que vigila la librería no nos quitaba el ojo de encima, was translated to the scarecrow watching over the bookshop hasn't taken his eyes off us. The word fantoche actually means like the person that is grotesque, or it can refer to a grotesque doll or someone that is dressed in a quirky way. So it was a very good adaptation to use scarecrow for fantoche. Another example of the second method most used was equivalence, and the expression says, menudo par de casamenteras, translated to what a couple of matchmakers, which is a perfect equivalence for both. Just to say a little comment, it's not quite the same for me because casamenteras actually can be described for me as a woman who always meddles in people's lives, who always likes to gossip and enjoy people together. So there is no casamentero in Spanish, and for me, matchmaker can be someone that is a boy or a girl. And it's not like a prototypical woman that likes to meddle in people's life. I know a lot of casamenteras in my life, my aunt. So another examples are, I'm sorry for the bad word I'm going to use. Hijo de puta, te juro que te voy a arrancar el alma hostias, which was translated to, you son of a bitch, I swear I'm going to beat your brains out. It's a very good adaptation about arrancar el alma hostias, to beat your brains out. Another example, this is a borrowing, is el marido de su mata Hari Nuria Montfort, the husband of your mata Hari Nuria Montfort. Nevertheless, there are sentences that the translator could not find an equivalent and decided to omit the expression. For example, la llamaban higadillos porque sufría de halitosis. Higadillos is expressed in a funny way because it refers to a certain food that is made of onions and garlic and leaves it with a really bad breath. So the author just decided to omit this expression of the bad breath and use the word ugly instead. Because I can understand that she couldn't find any definition of higadillos. Also, it's very important to talk about Lucia Graves, which is the translator and a very good one. She was born in England, in 1943, but moved to the island of Mallorca at the age of 3. The translator spoke English at home, but lived surrounded by the culture of Spain, and it was a key element for obtaining her better understanding of the works she translated into English. She is well known for translating most of the work of her father, Robert Graves, and also of Anais Nin, Catherine Mansfield, and Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Conclusion. Humans use language as a vehicle to transmit their needs and emotions. And at the same time that humans are transmitting those needs and emotions, they are transmitting the culture they are part of. So communication is like swimming. Language is the swimming skill and culture is the water. Without language, communication will remain to a very limited degree, in a very shallow water. Without culture, there will be no communication at all. Language is part of culture, and without culture, it could not be possible. Language simultaneously reflects culture and is influenced and shaped by it. As complex as cultures are, so is their language. This creates it difficult for people around the globe to understand different texts that are not related to their culture. Literature, culture, and language are connected intrinsically. Language can only have meaning if the hearer can understand the culture the speaker is referring to, and this also applies in a literary work. So, La Sombra del Viento by Carlos Ruiz Zafón is I'm gonna say, it's my favorite book. It's one of my favorite books, and it's a novel that does not fit in one genre, like I explained myself before. It's a part mystery, part historical, part fantasy with elements of romance and gothic, but mainly it's a novel for book lovers. It's an ode to the art of reading. The story develops in Spain, where Carlos Ruiz Zafón was born, in 1945 in Barcelona, in the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War and the World War II. Most of the book is told by a little boy called Daniel Perez, which is a 15-year-old boy. But even though it's told by a 15-year-old boy, the author emulates a 19th century author. He uses dark imagination, giving life to a Gothic Barcelona, and highlights the dazzling aspects of Spanish language. This is a good example of the importance of understanding the culture attached to the source language in order to convey the story originally written in Spanish. Sorry. The comprehension of the culture of Spain in 1945 and the Spanish language made it possible to translate this book. And to answer the questions mentioned in the research questions section of this paper, the translator of the book uses different techniques to achieve its goal to render in the book and everything it implies. These techniques are borrowing, adaptation, calque, literal translation, modulation, and equivalence. These techniques help her carry through the intentions of the author, since every sentence was expressed in the target language, or at least the closest equivalents she could find. Most of the examples extracted have a successful rendering. Nevertheless, the translated phrases meet the source text and are related to the context in which they were used. But it's not a full equivalence because there is an essence that is missed. And here are my examples of why this occurs. Fumero debe estar reclutando aprendices en el Cotolengo. So Cotolengo, we have a Cotolengo here and also in Spain. It's a place with people of mental disabilities or mental problem conditions have, and they go there. And it's used an expression that Fumero, the recruiting apprentices of Fumero are not the brightest ones. And the translation used charity hospice. But charity hospice can be used like people with economical problems or other types. It's a very broad sentence. It's not the spiteful one like Cotolengo. Mm-hmm. Another example is, oye, dice Cary Grant es de la acera de enfrente. And the translation was, did you know they say Cary Grant is queer? Again, we have to understand the time and era that this book is occurring, because the gay community was still a taboo, so they don't talk about that someone is gay or is queer. They imply that someone is that. So they use the expression la acera de enfrente. It's very fine to say it's queer, but for me, something is missing there. Some part of the culture is missing, and without saying la acera de enfrente. Both utterances in the target text have relation to the story and give meaning to the reader, but a part of the source text is lost in the translation. So, for me, the equivalence can be found in translation as well as rendering of the La Sombra del Viento. The author of this paper read both versions. They were both equally beautiful, and they transmit the magic that Carlos Ruiz Zafón conveys. Different authors describe the possibility of equivalence and to achieve translation, even though the grammatical differences are involved between the source language and the target language. But at the same time, those authors recognize that there are limitations in a translation and something may be lost. Essentially, translation is achieved but only to a certain degree. The purpose of this study was to obtain a better understanding of the translation process, specifically cultural bound terms, in order to conclude if the translation itself can be achieved. These questions took the author of this research project to the core of translation and its central problem, equivalence. Throughout the findings in the results section and the conclusion, the author of this paper can conclude that translation is accomplished, but only to a certain extent. The work of a translator is not in vain, since the expressions were successfully rendered from the source text to the target text, even though the language is not the same, nor the culture of the audience. So, thank you very much, and I'm willing to hear your questions. I'm going to, I think we finished.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you very much for your dissertation. We're going to ask Professor Weaver, Professor Franco to ask you a couple of questions, and then I will have one final question for you, Cecilia.
Okay. Sorry, I wanted to drink.
Good evening. So I guess I'm being targeted to lead off on this. I had read the book originally some years ago, and then later, when I was asked to read the thesis by Cecilia, she loaned me again the book, and then I realized, yes, this is the book I had read before. It is a complex book. I wonder how cognizant translators are, do you think, Cecilia, when they are translating? Do you think they're actually analyzing what category a particular phrase is being, the way it's being rendered, or they just translate it as it seems natural to them, and then in retrospect, perhaps we can categorize that and say it's an adaptation or it's a calque or whatever. I'm asking you, do you think that Lucia Graves had a conscious employment of these techniques, or is it a matter of identifying what has been used in her translation and then recognizing a pattern?
I think she wasn't aware of the technique she was using, because I think she prioritized the style of the text and the words that Carlos Luis Zafón tries to convey. So she put first the intention of the author, and then I think she would tries to follow a pattern of techniques. But for me, she prioritized the text itself.
Yes. I'd like to listen to your response to other questions, and then perhaps reserve the right to another question, Mr. Aquino, if we have time. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you.
Professor Franco, if you have a question for Cecilia, please.
Hi, Cecilia. Well, since you were talking about, of course, equivalence and how important it is, and that, like Mona Baker mentions, it's something that is, oh my God, the word just flew out of my mind. Oh my God, it's relative. Equivalence is relative.
Yes.
Which I completely agree. So how do you measure equivalence, right? That's the main point, I think. And also you talked about intentions of the author. I'm sure you read the Spanish and English versions. Yes. So do you think the intention of the author when he wrote in Spanish, was that conveyed in the English version?
Yes, like I said in my conclusion, I read both of them, and for me, actually, they were equally beautiful, because just as in Spanish has its beauties, also the English language has its own sort of beauties that they were transmitted in the English version of the book. So for me, yes.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I just want to add that to that question.
Yes.
To what extent or degree do you think there was some loss, things that you missed, from the Spanish original to the English?
I think it was minimal. My statement is that yes, translation is achieved, and what is actually lost is very minimal, because in the end you can get the whole gist of the book, the whole magic that is that Carla Rusafon tries to convey. You can receive it in the same book in English. So I think that it's very minimal, the thing that is lost. But for me, it's important to state that something is lost, even though it's a minimal part.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cecilia, I have more general questions for you, and this has to do with the following. If you have
What, sorry?
with the following question, if you have to translate a book of 200 pages, let's say The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, question number one, how much would you charge for that book? And question number two, which techniques are you going to use to translate the book?
How much I'm going to charge for that book? Oh my God, I love that book. Actually, I don't know how much I'm going to charge, because I think that because I'm not working right now with translation, I need to ask how the market is charging right now. I think that would be my idea of what I would do. And can you repeat, sorry, the second question?
Yes. Which techniques are you going to use to translate that book into Spanish?
I think that I will answer the same question I said as Sharon. I will prioritize the text itself rather than start thinking about the techniques that I'm going to use. But if I have to answer one, I think that I will use more like adaptation and equivalence, because I think that they are the closest one to that gets the closest one to the translation that we need to reach.
Okay, and the final question, how are AI tools easier or more difficult to use to translate the book into Spanish and Spanish into English? So what I want to say here, Cecilia, is AI tools are going to be much easier for you to translate The Picture of Dorian Gray, or it's going to be more difficult for you, because we know that AI is a very powerful tool, but at the same time, it learns at a certain extent from cultural background. So if you want to respond to me in terms of that, please, we'll be really thankful.
Oh, I'm going to answer very passionately about this because I'm a book lover. So I think that artificial intelligence can help, but not the same way a translator can deepen into a text, not in the same way that we can understand something. So I think it could help sometimes when you maybe can give you ideas when you are like stuck in something, but I don't think that in artificial intelligence it's very helpful for literary books, at least.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. If there are no more questions, Professor Weaver, Professor Franco, we're going to invite cordially to Cecilia to leave the room, and we're going to let you know via WhatsApp to join us back in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Cecilia? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well,
let me know.
You, Cecilia. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I will post the video so you can deliberate. 1 second.
Cecilia?
Hi, thank you.
Cecilia, it is my pleasure, it is my job to let you know that you are the brand new Licenciada en Lengua Inglesa. So congratulations, Cecilia.
Thank you.
Let's put our hands together for her.
Thank you.
Well done, Cecilia. You did a great job. Professor Weir, Professor Franco, you're welcome to congratulate Cecilia as well.
Good evening. Well, you have passed the exam, my dear. And don't read your presentations next time. If you have a PowerPoint, do not read. Speak from your heart. If you have worked on literature, obviously you realize the art that is involved and the human expression is involved. But you have persisted and actually come up with a thesis with the revisions that were suggested, and you have passed the exam, and I hope that you will travel tomorrow with relief.
Thank you. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations, Cecilia. Congratulations. Well, yes, hopefully you will travel happy, very happy.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so
Safe
much
travels,
for your
Cecilia.
time.
No, thank you, Cecilia. Safe travels.
Safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank
Bye
you.
bye, Cecilia. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Okay.